Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are continuing the Paul Morphy saga and we are starting the match Paul Morphy versus Thomas Wilson Barnes. After his match with Samuel Standish Boden, Morphy now takes on the legendary Mr. Barnes, and you will see that Mr. Barnes' gameplay is peculiar to say the least. So without further ado, let's check out the game. This is only one of the games we're going to show. All in all, they played a total of 26 games, but not all 26 exist in recorded format, so we are only going to show some. Morphy with the white pieces now opens with e4, with e5 by Mr. Barnes, and bishop to c4, going for bishop's opening. We have knight f6 and now knight to f3. We transpose into the Petrov defense with Morphy gambiting the e4 pawn by basically just playing bishop to c4. So Mr. Barnes accepts the pawn. We have knight captures and now knight to c3, a gambit that was very well known in those days. Even Boden was a big fan of it. We have knight captures, d captures, and now f6, strengthening the e5 pawn. And although yes, you've played f6 very early on in the game. However, you will have some nice support for d5, and then you will have this massive center here. So it's not bad. Morphy castles, and now knight to c6. You still cannot go for d5, as both the bishop and the queen guard that. So here, knight to h4. Morphy goes for df5 square, as for the moment the knight is able to reach it. The bishop still doesn't cover it. And while you could play something like d5 with a pawn sacrifice, maybe you can play d6 for the bishop to guard the square, Mr. Barnes actually plays queen to e7, and he invites Morphy to go knight to f5. And it is as of move 7 that this position has never been reached again. And now Morphy goes for knight to f5. So the queen is under attack. Queen to c5, now putting pressure on the bishop. Morphy moves the bishop and only now d5, saying that now you cannot capture on d5 since your knight is hanging on f5. That's why Mr. Barnes invited Morphy's knight to f5. So Morphy just continues development with bishop to e3, with an attack on the queen, so you don't have time to grab the knight. Queen to a5 by Barnes, and now you can see that although Morphy did try to go for some rapid development, Mr. Barnes isn't doing all that bad, as he has a massive center here. He has a knight in the game, a queen into the game. The knight is under attack, so it's very hard to decide. Like, you could go for some knight captures on g7 action here, followed by queen h5 check, and then f4 to try and bust open the position, but it's hard to say if this is enough compensation for the sacrifice piece. So Morphy decides to go back with knight to h4 instead, and now bishop to e6. Barnes just keeps on developing, adds another defender to the d5 pawn, and only now queen to h5 check by Morphy. And here Barnes goes for g6. He invites the knight in, and Morphy goes for it. Knight captures on g6. Now you cannot capture because of captures, so Barnes just pins the knight. And now you cannot capture because of captures here. And Morphy goes queen to h4, saying, okay, I will give you a knight, but I will capture on f6. And Barnes says, okay, no problem. We have captures. The rook is now under attack, so rook g8 by Mr. Barnes, and rook 8 to d1. Morphy just calmly continues the game like he didn't just sacrifice material. And bishop to e7, kicking the queen away. We have queen to e6, pinning the bishop now, also with a triple attack here on the pawn. And bishop to f7, attacking and defending on d5. So Morphy has to move the queen, and he goes for queen to h3. And it's like the only good square to go to. You do not want to allow queenside castle. If you allow queenside castle, then black is just better. Black is still better, but with queenside castle, if the king leaves the center of the board, it's just lights out for Morphy. And here, of course, Barnes knows this, and he wants the castle. However, he needs to somehow block this diagonal, so he goes for knight to d8. And it's a bit too optimistic. He wants to get either the knight or the bishop to e6 to block the queen on h3, and then just castle queenside, or obviously the knight, as the knight is now blocking the path. However, Morphy now goes for f4, and things start happening. Now, if you try something like knight to e6 to try and do that, just rook captures on d5 will be extremely strong. And now the queen is under attack, the e5 pawn is under attack, and you just give back a bit too much. So here, on f4, Barnes played e4. he said, okay, we're not doing that, and well, our bishop still needs to be guarding the d5 pawn. But now we have another interesting move here. But even pause the video here and try to find this interesting move Morphy played while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on deciding that it's time to part with the rook. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on d5. Now the queen is under attack, and also queen to d7 is coming, so you do have to capture the rook, which is what Morphy, Mr. Barnes did with bishop captures on d5. But now queen h5 check, and now everything nicely connects here on d5. So king f8, and here just bishop captures on d5 with an attack on the rook here. So you don't have to worry about checkmate. The knight fortunately covers the f7 square, so it's not a problem. So rook g7, and now the move you had to see to sacrifice the rook, b4. Nicely kicking the queen away. We have queen to a6, and now even f5. And now again, there's well, just what do you do if f6 comes? You really don't want to open up this file. So what Mr. Barnes did here is that he decided, okay, we're not going to block the pawn with the queen. That's, I mean, the queen is much too valuable to waste on blocking a pawn. So we're just going to play knight to f7, and we will play perhaps queen f6 on the next move. Now we can bring the rook into the game as well. However, this loses the game for Barnes, but you will pause the video and figure out why while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on paying attention. As we already mentioned, that the opening of the f-file wins. However, it's not as straightforward as it seems. Just give me a second. But luckily it's not the mailman, it's Yelena. So here you of course go f6, and now it seems like yeah, of course you're just giving up a pawn, but not really, because you had to find the star move. So of course, if you don't want to lose a piece, bishop captures on f6, but now comes b5. And now you can see that you don't have all that many squares available to your queen. If you move the queen, you just lose on f6. And if you don't, well, this is covered by the bishop, this is covered by the bishop, so only d6 remains. And this is what Mr. Barnes goes for. He puts the queen on d6, but now comes bishop captures on f7. And you cannot recapture, because if you recapture, you've also set up a trick here. The queen and bishop guard the c5 square, so if you capture, then bishop c5 just wins the queen. That's Morphy's idea. So Barnes has to play b6 to restrict this the movement of the bishop. But now comes bishop to h6, and now everything is completely pinned. I thought it was a nice quote to use for this game. The pin is mightier than the sword, as you know, it's just pins for the entire game. So this now cannot be captured, and there's not much you can do here. King e7 is played, but now just bishop captures on g7, bishop captures, and bishop back to b3. And although Morphy is now regarding material up only one pawn, there's not much to be done. Rook and queen can now come to f7, which will be deadly. So Mr. Barnes played rook to f8, but it's not much. Rook captures on f8 with, sorry, first rook to f7 check, not captures. Now you will have to capture. Here is where Barnes captured, and now queen captures on f7. Now the bishop falls as well. King to d8, and now queen captures bishop on g7. And Barnes still has this nice e4 pass pawn going for him, so he will try to make use of that. Queen d1 check. King f2, queen d2 check, but now king g3. And now he starts pushing the pass pawn, but it is not enough. Queen f6 check by Morphy, king to c8, and now bishop to e6 with check. We have king to b7, and here Morphy just played queen to f3 check, and it was in this position that Thomas Wilson Barnes resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here, since it's mate in 3. And that's just it. So here he resigned, as now you can move the king, but if you move the king, you're just getting checkmated. Queen f8 check, you're gonna go to b7, and now it's just queen to c8 checkmate. Not a lot of fun. But yeah, Barnes played this really nicely. He played f6, he grabbed the center, he pushed Morphy all the way back, but then he made that one imprecise move, that knight to d8 idea, which simply allowed Morphy to to make use of the position here. After queen h3, he went knight to d8, and it was just giving Morphy a bit too much time. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Theo Kroon, Patrick Pogoda, Tariq Islam, Siddhartha Baki, and Anna Levenic for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Morphy saga. We are continuing with the match with Mr. Barnes, and we will see what happens then. Will the match with Staunton happen or not? What's taking so long, or you know, what else could have happened? But yeah, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.